Imagine you're walking through a crowded room, and suddenly you lock eyes with someone across the space. There's an instant magnetic pull. Something about them feels familiar, almost like coming home. Your heart races, your breathing quickens, and every cell in your body screams, "This is it, this is the one." But 6 months later, you're crying on your bathroom floor, wondering how someone who felt so right could have torn your world apart so completely. The charm has become manipulation. The passion has become control. The soulmate has become your greatest source of pain. What if I told you that this wasn't a coincidence? What if I told you that your unconscious mind orchestrated this entire encounter, not to hurt you, but to heal you? What if the most toxic person in your life is actually carrying the key to your psychological freedom, and you've been missing the message because you've been focused on the messenger? By the end of this journey together, I'm going to reveal Carl Jung's most revolutionary discovery about why we attract destructive relationships. A truth so profound that once you understand it, every painful encounter in your past will suddenly make perfect sense, and you'll never enter a relationship unconsciously again. This isn't just about toxic people. This is about the invisible puppet strings of the psyche and how to cut them forever. But first, let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah was a brilliant marketing executive who couldn't understand why every romantic relationship followed the same devastating pattern. She would meet someone charming, confident, seemingly perfect. The connection would be instant, electric, almost mystical. But within months, the charm would reveal itself as manipulation. The confidence would become arrogance. The perfection would crumble into narcissistic abuse. Time and time again, Sarah found herself asking the same question that haunts millions of people. Why do I keep attracting the same type of toxic person? What Sarah didn't know, what most of us don't know, is that this question contains a fundamental misunderstanding about how human psychology actually works. We don't attract toxic people, we unconsciously seek them out. And according to Carl Jung, there's a profound reason why. Jung spent decades studying what he called the shadow, the parts of our personality that we've rejected, denied, or pushed into the unconscious. These aren't necessarily evil parts. They're simply aspects of ourselves that we learned were unacceptable, usually in childhood. Maybe we learned that anger wasn't allowed, so we buried our assertiveness. Maybe we learned that being vulnerable was dangerous, so we buried our need for authentic connection. Maybe we learned that we weren't worthy of love, so we buried our self-worth. But here's what Jung discovered that revolutionized psychology. These buried parts don't disappear. They don't go away. Instead, they begin to operate from the shadows of our psyche, influencing our choices, our attractions, and our relationships in ways we never consciously recognize. Think about it for a moment. What qualities do the toxic people in your life consistently display? Are they controlling? Are they emotionally unavailable? Are they manipulative? Are they narcissistic? Now here's the uncomfortable question Jung would ask you. What would happen if you allowed yourself to be more controlling in healthy ways? What would happen if you protected your emotions more carefully? What would happen if you learned to influence situations for your own well-being? What would happen if you prioritized your own needs? The toxic people in our lives are often mirror reflections of the disowned aspects of our own personality. They're living out loud what we've forbidden ourselves to express. And on an unconscious level, we're drawn to them not because we enjoy being hurt, but because they represent parts of ourselves that we desperately need to reclaim and integrate. This is what Jung called projection. We project onto others the qualities we've rejected in ourselves. But projection works both ways. We're not just projecting onto toxic people, we're also attracting people who are projecting onto us. We become the screen for their unlived life, just as they become the screen for ours. Let me share with you a story that illustrates this perfectly. A client of mine, David, grew up with a father who was emotionally explosive and unpredictable. As a child, David learned to be hyper-attuned to other people's emotions, to be the peacemaker, to sacrifice his own needs to keep everyone else calm. He buried his own anger, his own needs, his own voice. As an adult, David consistently found himself in relationships with emotionally volatile partners. He would tell me, "I don't understand why I attract such angry people. I'm nothing like that. I hate conflict." But Jung would see something different. David wasn't attracting angry people despite being peaceful. He was attracting them because he was peaceful. His disowned anger was seeking expression through his partners. His buried assertiveness was trying to find a voice through their volatility. The universe was presenting him again and again with opportunities to reclaim the parts of himself he'd abandoned. This doesn't mean David was responsible for his partner's behavior. It means he was unconsciously participating in a dance where his disowned qualities and their expressed qualities created a perfect, albeit destructive, psychological match. Now, you might be thinking, but surely some people are just genuinely toxic, regardless of what I project onto them. And you're absolutely right. There are people who are genuinely harmful, manipulative, and dangerous. Jung's insights don't excuse their behavior or suggest that victims are to blame for abuse. What Jung offers us is something far more empowering, the understanding that we have unconscious patterns that influence our choices, and when we become conscious of these patterns, we can begin to change them. Here's where it gets really interesting. Jung observed that we don't just attract people who mirror our disowned shadow qualities. We also attract people who mirror our unlived potential, what he called the anima and animus, the contrasexual aspects of our psyche that represent our undeveloped creative and relational capacities. Sometimes the toxic person in our life isn't expressing our shadow at all. They're expressing our unlived greatness. They're confident in ways we've never allowed ourselves to be. They're creative in ways we've suppressed. They're independent in ways we've never dared. And we're drawn to them, not because they're toxic, but because they're living aspects of our potential that we've never accessed. The toxicity emerges when this dynamic becomes unconscious and compulsive, when we're trying to live vicariously through someone else instead of developing these qualities within ourselves, when we're trying to possess their confidence instead of cultivating our own, when we're trying to consume their creativity instead of accessing our own. But what about those people who seem to attract genuinely predatory individuals? The empaths who consistently end up with narcissists, the givers who consistently end up with takers. Jung would say this too is a shadow dynamic, but it's more subtle. Often what we call being too giving or being too empathetic is actually a sophisticated form of control. We give in order to be needed. We empathize in order to be indispensable. We sacrifice in order to be superior. And predatory people can sense this underlying dynamic. They're drawn to us not because we're genuinely selfless, but because our selflessness serves their needs while secretly serving our own ego needs as well. This is perhaps the most difficult shadow to recognize because it hides behind such virtuous qualities. But Jung was relentless in his exploration of the psyche's hidden motivations. He understood that the ego will use even the most beautiful qualities in service of its unconscious agenda. I remember working with a woman named Lisa who prided herself on being a helper, a healer, someone who was always there for others. She consistently attracted people who took advantage of her generosity, who drained her energy, who never reciprocated her care. She saw herself as a victim of selfish people, but as we explored her pattern more deeply, Lisa began to recognize something uncomfortable. She was addicted to being needed. Her identity was built around being the rescuer, the savior, the one person who could help when no one else could. And unconsciously, she was drawn to people who would never get better, never become independent, never stop needing her, because their neediness fed something in her that she hadn't acknowledged. The toxic people in Lisa's life weren't just using her. They were participating in a mutual dance where her need to be needed and their need to be saved created a perfect, if destructive, psychological ecosystem. When Lisa began to recognize this pattern, something remarkable happened. She didn't just start setting boundaries with toxic people, she started attracting different kinds of people altogether. People who were self-sufficient, healthy, capable of reciprocal relationships. The change wasn't in her behavior toward others, it was in her relationship with herself. This brings us to one of Jung's most profound insights about human relationships. We don't see people as they are, we see people as we are. The lens through which we perceive others is always colored by the contents of our own unconscious. This means that changing our external relationships begins with changing our internal relationship, the relationship we have with our own disowned qualities, our own unlived potential, our own hidden motivations. Now let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with this question. What if every toxic person in your life has been trying to teach you something essential about yourself? What if every manipulator has been showing you where you give your power away? What if every narcissist has been reflecting your own disowned self-love? What if every emotional vampire has been revealing where you leak energy through unconscious patterns? This isn't about blaming yourself or taking responsibility for other people's harmful behavior. This is about recognizing the profound intelligence of the unconscious mind and how it uses even difficult relationships to guide us toward wholeness. Jung called this process individuation, the journey toward becoming who we truly are by integrating all aspects of our personality, including the ones we've rejected. And he observed that our relationships, especially our most challenging ones, are the primary vehicles through which individuation occurs. But here's the thing about shadow work and individuation. It's not a one-time event. It's a lifelong process. As we integrate one shadow aspect, others emerge. As we reclaim one disowned quality, new projections surface. The goal isn't to reach some final state of psychological perfection. The goal is to become increasingly conscious of our unconscious patterns so we can choose our responses rather than being compulsively driven by them. And this brings us to practical application. How do you actually break the cycle of attracting toxic people? How do you use Jung's insights to transform your relationship patterns? First, you have to become willing to look at your own shadow. This means getting curious about the qualities you most despise in others. What behaviors trigger you most intensely? What personality traits make you feel disgusted or outraged? These intense reactions are usually signals pointing toward disowned aspects of your own psyche. I'm not suggesting you become like the people who hurt you. I'm suggesting you explore whether there might be healthy expressions of these qualities that you've rejected along with the toxic expressions. Maybe you rejected all forms of assertiveness because you witnessed aggression. Maybe you rejected all forms of self-focus because you witnessed narcissism. Maybe you rejected all forms of emotional expression because you witnessed volatility. Second, you have to examine your unconscious motivations in relationships. What are you secretly hoping to get? What role do you unconsciously play? Are you the rescuer hoping to be needed? Are you the victim hoping to be saved? Are you the giver hoping to be appreciated? Are you the supporter hoping to be validated? None of these roles are inherently wrong, but when they're unconscious and compulsive, they create the very dynamics that attract toxic people. Toxic people are expert at recognizing and exploiting unconscious motivations. Third, you have to develop what Jung called conscious suffering. This means learning to sit with uncomfortable emotions, unfulfilled needs, and psychological tensions without immediately seeking someone else to fix them, fill them, or resolve them for you. Most of our toxic relationship patterns are attempts to avoid the discomfort of our own inner work. When you can be with your own loneliness without desperately seeking connection, you stop attracting people who exploit your desperation. When you can be with your own anger without suppressing it or projecting it, you stop attracting people who are compulsively angry on your behalf. When you can be with your own needs without shame, you stop attracting people who take advantage of your self-neglect. And finally, you have to practice what Jung called holding the tension of opposites. This means learning to contain paradox, to be both strong and vulnerable, both assertive and receptive, both independent and connected, both confident and humble. When you can hold these opposites within yourself, you stop needing other people to carry one pole while you carry the other. The people who seem immune to toxic relationships aren't people who have perfected themselves or eliminated their shadows. They're people who have developed a conscious relationship with their own complexity. They know their vulnerabilities. They own their power. They accept their contradictions, and they choose their relationships from a place of consciousness rather than compulsion. This is the journey Jung mapped for us, not toward perfection, but toward consciousness, not toward eliminating difficulty, but toward transforming our relationship with difficulty, not toward finding the perfect person, but toward becoming whole enough that we can choose relationships from love rather than from unconscious need. Now here's the profound realization I promised you at the beginning of our journey together. Jung discovered that what we call toxic people are often what he termed wounded healers, people whose own psychological wounds have become distorted into harmful behaviors, but who are nonetheless carrying important medicine for our growth. This doesn't excuse their behavior or mean we should stay in harmful relationships. It means we can extract the medicine, the lesson, the mirror, the invitation to growth without consuming the poison. Every person who has hurt you has also shown you something about yourself that needed to be seen. Every person who has betrayed you has revealed where you betray yourself. Every person who has abandoned you has illuminated where you abandon yourself. Every person who has manipulated you has shown you where you manipulate yourself through unconscious patterns and limiting beliefs. This is Jung's revolutionary insight. Our outer relationships are perfect mirrors of our inner relationships. When we heal the relationship we have with our own disowned qualities, when we reclaim our projections and integrate our shadows, when we learn to love the full spectrum of who we are, including the parts we've rejected, our outer relationships transform naturally. You don't have to work on attracting better people. You have to work on becoming a more conscious person. You don't have to learn better strategies for avoiding toxic people. You have to learn to recognize and heal the unconscious patterns that make you vulnerable to toxicity in the first place. The mirror in the darkness I asked you to imagine at the beginning of this journey wasn't showing you that you're the same as the people who hurt you. It was showing you that they're reflections of the parts of yourself you haven't yet learned to love, integrate and express in healthy ways. And when you turn toward those reflections with curiosity instead of judgment, with compassion instead of rejection, with consciousness instead of compulsion, something magical happens. The toxic people don't disappear from the world, but they disappear from your world. Not because you're avoiding them, but because you're no longer unconsciously calling them to you. You've reclaimed the medicine they were carrying for you. You've learned the lesson they came to teach. You've integrated the shadow they were reflecting back to you. And in that integration, you become free, not from the complexity of human relationships, but from the unconscious patterns that keep you trapped in cycles of suffering. You become capable of what Jung called conscious relationship that serves growth, healing, and the fullest expression of who you're meant to be. If this exploration of Jung's psychological insights has resonated with you, if you're ready to dive deeper into the unconscious patterns that shape your relationships and your life, I invite you to subscribe and join our community of conscious explorers. Share in the comments below What quality do you most judge in others that might be a disowned part of your own shadow? What pattern in your relationships are you ready to transform? And stay tuned for our next journey together, where we'll explore Jung's insights into dreams and their role in revealing the unconscious dynamics that govern our waking relationships. Because the same people who appear as toxic in your daily life often appear in your dreams as messengers, carrying important information about your path towards psychological wholeness. Remember, the goal isn't to become perfect. The goal is to become conscious. And consciousness, as Jung knew, is the beginning of all true freedom.